Hey everyone, we are young people working on the TurningPointCT project, a mental wellness resource guide by and for young adults and teens in Connecticut. Today we are going to be talking about what we learned in a QPR suicide prevention training about how to help somebody who comes to us with a mental health emergency or tells us that we are suicidal. So I'm joined by some other people working on the project this summer. So what did you guys learn? What were some interesting facts that you took away from it?
I definitely learned just the steps of QPR in general. I've been CPR certified before, but I thought QPR obviously sounds pretty similar. And so we learned that the steps to the QPR training were question, persuade, and then refer. And those are used when you encounter somebody who may be, thinking about suicide or I guess is contemplating harming themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, I know that the one thing I took away from the training itself was kind of like some of the warning signs to look out for, and that itself made me think about some of the people in my life um, that I hadn't been thinking about before. So maybe some of the less apparent ones. So even just access to something to harm yourself or kill yourself, like pills or gun. Um, Even just putting your affairs in order. So if somebody's giving you a gift about something that they really care about, that can be a kind of indication. Anybody else?
Was gonna say, I was kind of anxious. I mean, I was excited when I heard that we were going to be doing this training, but I was also kind of anxious because I was like, well, am I going to be able to do this? Like, I've never had any training or anything, but the fact that it's such a simple guide to have, I found was really helpful because having the conversation is hard, and then once you ask the question, are you suicidal, or are you thinking about harming yourself, it's okay, now what? But with these steps, it's okay, here's the next step, and it's just a very easy thing that anyone can do, which I didn't really think was gonna be something that again I was gonna be able to do, but it's definitely anybody can have this training, which is really great.
Yeah, that's great that you kind of took that away from it. Lisa, did you have something?
Yeah, I was also gonna add to what people have been saying before. Um, I found that the greatest takeaway that I had was the fact that it's really important to phrase your questions appropriately and ask, but also ask directly. I know a lot of people are afraid of feeling confrontational or the topic is really heavy, so of course you're not going to want to come out and ask are you thinking of ending your life, you're thinking of harming yourself, killing yourself, something like that. But it's also really important to be direct in that, just so you get the reality of it out there, and you're able to further move on with the person that you're talking to.
Yeah, that was a really significant thing that I took away from it too. My own experience of being feeling suicidal, even in my therapist session, I was feeling suicidal, but my therapist kind of skirted around the question, and it made it really easy for me not to admit it to her and just kind of to avoid answering in that way. Um, so I know that from my personal experience of it, I know that it's really important just to be really forward and ask that person, are you thinking of suicide? Are you thinking of killing yourself? Because like it's a yes or no question, and to not allow them a way to skirt around it is super valuable. And um, definitely all the situations around how to frame the question is really important too. So not waiting, because you maybe you don't think it's the right time or whatever, but it's really important just to put it out there and to be persistent. Make sure you're kind of in a pretty private setting, that you're pretty much just one-on-one, so that person feels like they're only just talking to you, rather than having to present to maybe some people that they don't feel comfortable talking to. And one thing that could be really helpful to think about is having some like resources to fall back on. So like for me, I now have like the National Suicide Lifeline in my phone, in my contacts. The crisis text line is like super easy to kind of just like run off and tell somebody like text this number and you're going to get some support. So those are some things that I took away from the training itself. Ben, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yeah. So just like one thing that stuck out in the training was that I think it was like the example of the police officer who was like standing on the Golden Gate Bridge and was like just helping like talking to people who seemed as if like they were in danger of committing suicide or something. And I think he said that like the vast majority of the people, like once he showed that he cared and that he wanted to help them, that was enough to save, I think, like all but one of the people. And like the one person who did, he was like talking to them for 6 hours, and like in the end they decided to go through with it. But like for everyone else, it like just showing that you cared was like really big.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. I think it was like a similar situation, except it wasn't somebody who was like helping, in a position of helping. It was somebody that was on a bridge and like in that position where they were about to do it, and then like this family of tourists like came up to them and they thought that, oh, this is like my chance to tell somebody to get help, and they just asked them for a picture. So that was like so heartbreaking to me, because it's like you're just looking for help from anybody, whether it be a stranger, whether it be somebody that you care about or somebody in your life. So that was something that kind of struck home to me, where like I think my natural instinct, and maybe it is for you guys too, is to feel like, oh, like that person obviously is going to have somebody in their life that's looking out for them, for caring for them and noticing these things in their life. But really you might be like their only contact. You might be like their only like lifeline to getting help and to kind of receiving that help. So that was something for me that I'm going to hold on to and kind of take with me, and it will hopefully kind of take down those barriers that I feel that might stop me from reaching out to somebody, even if I don't know them, to just, potentially be the one person that does ask them the question. So yeah, that's a great point to bring up, Ben. So how did it feel during the training? Like, you might not have ever experienced this kind of thing before, or was it kind of jarring? Was it triggering? What was your kind of emotional takeaway from being in the training?
Being in the training, I was kind of nervous because, same as you, I was suicidal before and I had to go to therapy. So I've been there. And same as the training, my therapist tried to not directly ask me if I was suicidal. She would like ask me questions, and she would sit there in silence and just wait for me to say something. So it was kind of awkward, but I'm like, should I just tell her? But I just told her anyway because I needed help. So the trainer actually helped me because I actually have friends who are suicidal now. So I tried to like talk to them, make sure I could be there for them, stop it, know the warning signs before it gets worse. So I was kind of happy to learn, but at the same time, I was kind of like sad.
Yeah, Abrian.
Just to piggyback off of what Camille just said, I thought it was super important where, like, in my head, I know that me saying or like asking somebody if they're suicidal isn't going to make them suicidal, but I think that there's a weird, like, I don't know if it's per se a stigma, but even in like a role play or like in the training, or as you guys are saying, like with your therapists, there is still very much like a hesitation to actually come out and ask the yes or no question. And just Margaret did say, she's like, you asking isn't going to, suddenly trigger like oh, like that's a good idea sort of thing. Like it's literally just asking the yes or no question. Like if they already are, then you saying that isn't going to make them, suddenly switch to that sort of thinking. Like it's more or less just asking for a direct answer, which I thought was, super important just because I obviously don't consciously think that, but I definitely think it's a subconscious thought potentially.
Yeah, definitely. And
Going off what
Mhm.
she just said, one of the takeaways that I got from this was we were kind of going over like myths, and one of them was like if you ask someone if they're suicidal, you're like putting it into their head, and like I think that's really important to note that like that's not the case. So like you shouldn't be afraid to have the conversation.
Yeah, because it really is like it's just like a feeling that somebody carries with them. So it's not necessarily like gonna plant that idea in somebody that is feeling kind of depressed and hopeless and thinking like, oh, maybe this is something I should think about now. It really just provides the person that is carrying it with them the chance to kind of get it out there into the open, and even that itself can be really healing and really really helpful. I know Mariah just said in the chat that it felt really awkward to her because she had people ask her the same question, so it felt weird being on the other side of it. I don't know if that's kind of resonated with anybody. I know it definitely did for me to have to think about like my own experience of being the person like receiving the question, um, and think about like the things that I was exhibiting to them, and having to kind of have to think about how that applies to other people. Maybe it show like exhibits in different ways, but yeah, it's definitely like a weird like switch around where you now have to be asking somebody else that question. But I think it does offer you like a really unique perspective, and potentially that could be part of like your persuade step, is saying like I've been there myself. I've come back from it. I'm now here helping you. You can help other people too. There's different ways of like approaching it, even if you haven't experienced suicidality in yourself. Um, there's different like things to do to approach kind of the question. And yeah, one thing that I took away from kind of like approaching the question was like I didn't know, like it feels crazy to just be like talking to someone and then pop the question like, are you feeling suicidal? So one thing that Margaret suggested to me was kind of like starting by identifying things that you've noticed. So saying like, I've noticed that you've been like not going to your classes recently. I've noticed that you've kind of been smiling less. I've noticed like kind of like picking up on like these specific things can help you then lead into asking the question and kind of giving them the opportunity to be like, yeah, I have been feeling like less happy recently. I have like, and this is why. So I think that was a really useful thing that I've taken away from it. Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the importance of like talking about things that you've noticed that change, because I think it really shows that you like care about that person, being like, yeah, I know like how you were and how things have changed. And I don't know, it like brings attention to the fact that like someone is in their corner to like help them or want to support them. Because I know like a lot of people, when they get to the point of contemplating suicide, they sort of feel like, you know, they're like alone, they're like a burden to other people. But just, I don't know, like that gesture in itself, to me at least, seems like something that could help someone at least temporarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really helps to, show them that they're seen, they're valid in what they've been kind of expressing. Because, like, again, from my own personal experience, I felt like I was trying to send out like some signals, like whether it be conscious or not, either like honestly at the time it was like very angsty, and like I was walking through the hallways like super solemn and just like so hoping that somebody would be like, yo, are you okay? And I think there was like one person that I was sitting next to in a class that said, I've noticed that you've like been kind of sad recently, are you okay? Like they weren't even my friend. And seeing like that recognition of seeing and then actually asking me whether I'm okay and whether they can help at all, was so like monumental, and definitely helped in making me feel a little less like alone and isolated in what I was going through.
Unlike Ella, like I've like thankfully never been in a position where I felt suicidal and felt like I needed help in that sense. And that like made it a little bit challenging for me to like understand. Like I understand from someone who's trying to help out, which is what the QPR training is all about, but to understand like their answers. But I'm actually reading a book right now called It's Kind of a Funny Story, and it's about this teenager who is depressed and suicidal. And as I'm reading it, and one of the friends calls him and is like, don't do anything stupid tonight. And he says, I'm not, because in his head, killing himself isn't stupid. That's what he wants to do. Like I kept thinking about the training and how that's why we like have to be direct in asking the question. And it was just really helpful to have gotten that training and to kind of see it like through the book.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, in like why it is important to be like super direct with it. And yeah, it's not something that I felt comfortable with doing before, or I thought would be useful in kind of taking that step. But I know now that it is something that I need to do in the future, and I'll definitely be carrying that with me, to try and help more people in the future. But I think it's so easy to kind of fall into like a really like guilty trap of feeling like I could have done more for somebody in my past. But I think it's really important to, acknowledge that what you were doing was trying to help that person, whether it be you just being there for them, opening up the conversation, whatever it is. So I think that itself is really important to acknowledge that you were doing the best with the resources that you had, and to not take on, like you didn't have the training before, you didn't have all of these like steps to break it down, and to, instead of feeling like guilt for the past, but just taking the resources to the future.
Something that I learned during the training, like I didn't even know if this was a thing before, but Margaret was talking about it, is there by under the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, they're making like nets so that to catch people who try to jump off the bridge. And to me, that was something that was like so incredibly powerful, just to know, like, because even if you feel like all alone, or you feel like no one like cares about you, or no one's gonna miss you, to like have, even like to see that, even if you don't end up like going through with it, even to see that, to me is like the message of like hope, and like you are cared about, like your life is cared about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think even coming from a stranger, that can be really powerful. Like, you care about me, you don't even know about me. But I think how I feel about if I came across somebody that was in that position, like they were feeling really hopeless and that nobody cared about them, I'd literally just be like, you are so important. Like, I don't know you, but whatever role you have in this role is important, and it's important that you're here to at least, share your experience and to help some other people. Because that in itself kind of becomes like a mission. It has been for me. And that's kind of one thing that's helped me get through like my lower days, is knowing that maybe for whatever reason I'm on this earth to, share my story, to to give hope to people that might not have it. So yeah, that's a great point, Vanessa. So I want to thank everybody so much for, participating and being part of the conversation, because it's just so important to, talk about it and kind of destigmatize the whole conversation about suicide and mental illness in general. And I loved hearing about everything that you guys learned from the training. And I think this is going to be super helpful for anybody that is interested in getting training in it in the future, or even just, taking on this information and, using it to help somebody that you're thinking about in your life. So thank you all so much. And thanks for our viewers for watching. Have a good day, everybody.